Look at that, I got a pen. And this is because he treats the pre-Islamic period, and very few people do. So he's got Saba and Himyar, first chapter, the history and legends of the pagan pre-Islamic Arabs, and pre-Islamic poetry. And then, that's the third chapter. Pre-Islamic poetry we'll pick up in the second part of the class when we deal with culture. So really we'll only do the first two chapters of Nicholson now. And then in those other books, those more cultural books that I had in the packet, I think it's, one is called Islamic Civilization by Arberry, and the other is by a guy named Kritzeck, an anthology of Arab and Islamic literature. They've got selections too from pre-Islamic poetry that we'll pick up in the second part of the class in the cultural section. So we don't even need those sections. All we need are these first two chapters of Nicholson, really. And maybe a little bit from the poetry just to get an idea of what some of the ethos of the period was. So I don't think you can understand the Arabs or Islam without going into the pre-Islamic period. And that's why I think that's so important. So that's what you'll be looking for. If you go to the reserve room, you can read those chapters. Hopefully I'll go down there and start yelling at them again. I mean, because they gave me no indication that they were behind on these so-called permissions that they were supposed to get last June. And certainly from Nicholson, there shouldn't be any problem anyway. It's maybe some of the other books. So they can give you a separate, better have it all in one book. This is the hold-up, then we have to do something about that. So by noontime, we'll either try in the reserve room or see what's happened down in the bookstore by noontime. Because after this class, I'm going to go down and see what we can do to rectify things if possible. So what we're dealing with here is what the Muslims call, and the reason we start with the Arabs, because as we already know now in the world, Islam is not just Arabs, and that's one of the huge problems, of course, we're finding today in Iraq. People think, oh, Iraq, it's an Arab country. Well, it is and it isn't. They speak Arabic, most of the people there, but some I'm sure speak Persian, and the Kurds have their own language. So Arabic is probably the dominant force in Iraq in terms of numbers and language, but not the total picture. And, all just about of the dominant groups in Iraq are Islamic, but Islam of different kinds, as we're seeing. And some are not even Muslims at all. For instance, there's a lot of Iraqi Christians. And I'm not just saying new converts like you get in South America or someplace, either Catholic or fundamentalist evangelical that are moving into South American areas, but these are old Christians. These are what are, I think you call them Syriac Christians. These go back to the founding days of Christianity in the first and second and third centuries of the Christian period. These are not new Christians. These are old Christians before Islam swept over the area. And there are also some odd other groups. For instance, there are pre-Christian, semi-Christian groups who Saddam Hussein tried to destroy, called the Mandans. And they're a unique group. They're daily bathers, and that goes way back to the period that I work on with the Dead Sea Scrolls. Those are daily bather groups. And they wear white. They have priests who are called Nusayra or Nazarene, the way Christians were first called back in the old period, and they follow the teaching they say, whether they do or not, I can't affirm, of John the Baptist, and not of Jesus. they follow John the Baptist. They're followers of John the Baptist, and as I said, they emphasize bathing and so on. So that's a very old group that has survived to the present. And they lived in the sort of marshes of southern Iraq. You know, that's a big river delta there, like New Orleans. Like the mouth of the Mississippi, that's the mouth of the Tigris and the Euphrates River. And there's a delta there where people lived really on houseboats among the reeds. I don't like to call it swamps because it's more like a watery, reeded area. So most of the Mandaeans lived there. And Saddam, actually for some reason, I don't know what his rationale was, I don't think he was particularly anti-Christian as such, but he wanted to drain the swamps for some reason and destroy their habitat, and he forced a lot of them out of that area, sort of population control activity. And since the invasion, if you want to call it, the American-led coalition, if you want to call it invasion or whatever, if you're against it, you'll call it an invasion. If you're for it, you'll call it something else. Since that time, they've sort of been reinvigorating, reflooding the swamps so that these people, I guess, can have their old lifestyle back, which is a very interesting thing that's going on there. Have a little sort of tickle in my throat, so I'll just open this up, hope you'll go away. So if I keep coughing, you'll understand. I don't know where it came from, but there it is. So these people still exist. So there are these funny survivor groups that exist. So take even the Kurds, for instance. They're a very old group, very old group. They're known in Roman times. They actually were very Judaized in Roman times. We have stories about them and conversion to some extent into Judaism. Then they became Christianized. Then they became Islamicized. So there's a whole development of the Kurds in northern Iraq. They've been there long before any other groups were there. They've been given the worst time of all by everybody. Again, I'm off the subject here, but since we're talking about Islam, Arabs, and so on, I thought we would bring contemporary things to make it more vivid for you. To my way of thinking, and if I drew a map of, I was going to draw a map of the Arabian Peninsula, but since Iraq is so much in the news here, draw a picture of Iraq, you know, here are the rivers that come down here. This is the marsh area in the south, or the marsh Arabs, as they're called. Most of them Mandaeans lived until recently. Baghdad is up here someplace. But the Kurds are up here, and they spread out into Turkey and northern Syria here and into Iran there. They're actually a very big group. And they've been given the so-called shaft, if you want to call it that, by everybody. By the British, who established Iraq in its present form, who put it together out of these multiple pieces. They always did this kind of thing, the British. They put areas together that may not have belonged together, classically speaking. Then they used to use minorities to dominate majorities, so that the minority would be completely indebted to them, and that's something that was happening in Iraq. The British map drawing took place after the First World War in the wake of the Versailles Peace Conference, where they were given mandates for all these places. They were given a mandate for Palestine, and you know the mess they made out of Palestine. They had Cyprus, and they made a huge mess out of Cyprus. Turks and the Greeks are still fighting each other. India, they made a huge mess out of that, even though Indians worship British culture. Huge killing occurred when they went left, because they put the minority over the majority there. They put the minority over the majority in Cyprus. They did the same in Iraq. In India, as you know, the Muslims and Hindus started killing each other in a ferocious manner on the British departure, and they divided the place up now into 2 countries, 3 countries in fact. And even today, there's no peace between them, whereas earlier they were more or less living in harmony. So, you know, a lot of this map drawing can be given to India, to British responsibility in a lot of these areas. Palestine is an atrocious example. Palestine, well, the mandate for Palestine was on two sides of both of the river. It was given to them by the League of Nations, and it incorporated the whole area from the Mediterranean to the Iraq border. That is all of Jordan and so on, which was very underpopulated. And what the British did was cut 3/4 of that away in a unilateral action that was never confirmed by anybody, and gave it to a family from Mecca called the Sharifs of Mecca that had helped them in the war against the Turks in the revolt that you may have seen if you've seen the Lawrence of Arabia movies. And so in taking 3/4 of the territory away, they squeezed the whole Arab-Jewish problem into the remaining quarter on the other side of the Jordan River. I think in the original mandate for Palestine, there was plenty of room to solve the issue of the rights of both peoples within this huge landmass, but what they did instead was squeeze the whole issue into the right bank of the Palestinian, of the Jordan River, instead of, if you like, the left bank in any case. That's why they called it Transjordan when they cut that away. And so finally, instead of 2 states emerging out of the Palestine mandate, 3 states are now emerging out of the Palestine mandate, 2 of which hardly have any room to breathe, the Palestinian and the Israeli state, and are at each other's throats. Whereas the 3rd state gets away scot-free because the British worked it out that way. And to my mind, that was illegitimate from the beginning in terms of what was done. So a lot of these problems were created by British administrative officials. Not that necessarily things would have gotten any better or worse. All I'm just saying is a lot of things occurred. Iraq is another example. You may not know this, but again, these mandates were given out by the League of Nations from 1922 on. The French got Syria and Lebanon, and that's another huge story of a mess. And they also got, the British got mandates for Kenya and other places that ended up in a huge killing and a messy situation. Uganda still has not recovered from what happened down there, and you're still getting a total mess in that country regarding what was occurred there. And Nigeria, another country, where there's a huge civil war between the Biafrans and the Christians and the Muslims, and that's a place where the British had mandates too. So, you know, the British are good people, mean well, but they're actually cause a lot of trouble with their manipulating maps. Iraq is a place they manipulated maps, and Americans and Iraqis are paying the price at the moment, a lot of other people. But the Kurds have paid the biggest price, because what happened way back at the time of the League of Nations is Kurdish nationalism was denied by everybody, even though there's a huge amount of Kurds. And the Turks cut off a huge chunk after World War I and made it Turkey, but that included in the eastern parts of Turkey huge chunks of Kurdish areas. We're only learning that Kurds even exist in the last 3 years. I'm sure if you asked the average American who a Kurd was 4 years ago, they said, what? Isn't that something that you get out of butter? They wouldn't have had any idea there was such a thing as a Kurd. Well, the Kurds, the Turks like to call them mountain Turks, so they're not mountain Turks. It's just a euphemism so they don't have to give up the area that the Kurds inhabit, which is all of southeastern Turkey. Yeah, all of southeastern Turkey. And then western Iran is also Kurdish. And northeastern Syria is Kurdish. And northern Iraq is Kurdish. So their national rights were totally disregarded, and it was all because of oil. For the Iraq was all because of oil, because the oil in the north was mainly in Kurdish territories. And that's the problem today. That's why they don't want to have a federalized Iraq. That's why they don't want to approve the Constitution. That's why the Kurds are all being stubborn. They don't want to give up the semi-independence they have. That's why the Shiites are now saying we want our autonomous regions. That's why the Sunnis are saying we don't want these places to have the autonomous regions because they'll control all of the oil and we won't get any. And it's true that the central area where you mostly have Sunnis don't have the oil resources and so on. So all these problems are built in from the beginning. But again, my mind is in the Versailles Peace Conference, the Kurds were totally left out. The British refused to recognize their rights, created this Iraq, used the Sunni minority to rule all the others, and that's how they administered the country. And we are paying the price now for it. For better or for worse, say, why'd you get involved anyway? Well, the extremist Muslims say, well, you let us take care of it. We would take care of the whole thing. We just make everyone extremist Muslims like ourselves. Well, that's true too. But that would be done under force in the sense that if you don't do it our way, you could be treated quite harshly. So that doesn't mean that's what the average person wants necessarily. It certainly isn't what the average Kurd wants. And so on. The Iraqis were very modern in many areas, and many were westernized to try to make them go back to a medieval Islamic situation. May seem attractive to a believing person like an evangelical or a fundamentalist person here. That may seem like the right thing to do to America too. But there are many people in America who would object to going back to an evangelical fundamentalist position, the same as there would be in those countries. But if you do it under threat, if you have a system where, in fact, if you don't do it, you can be treated harshly, then you're in a different world. So it's not such an easy thing, and there are people who come at it from all sides. But to my mind, if the Kurdish problem had been properly addressed from the beginning, a lot of this would never have happened and been solved. But that's water over the dam. And the Kurdish problem is still not going to be addressed properly because Iran, Turkey, and Syria will not want it to be addressed properly, nor will the Saudis want it to be addressed properly, because we'll leave their compatriots, the Sunnis, without oil and without wealth and so on. And so the Kurds are still going to be, excuse the expression, given the shaft as much as possible by everybody. But the Kurds are Muslims too. So if you're a Muslim, you have not much right to say, well, the Kurds shouldn't have their position too. This has to do with Arab Islam versus pan-Islam versus pan-Muslim versus pan-Arabism. Let's go back to our beginning point. Now you see how complicated this all is. Why do we start with the Arabs? Because the Arabs are the people out of whom most people think Islam sprung. And that's true. So when we want to get some information about what most Muslims know or believe, we have to go back to the Arabs. Because whether you like it or admit it or care about it or not, Muhammad was an Arabian prophet, and he makes no bones about that. He basically calls himself a warner to the Arabian people. So first of all, we have to do, even if we come from Indonesia, even if we come from Pakistan, even if we come from many other areas of the Muslim world, Nigeria or wherever, everyone will know the Arab roots of Islam. So the Arabs have that claim, and they have that right to be acknowledged as the bringers of Islam to the rest of the Muslims. That Muhammad was born as part of the Arab nation, if you can call it as such. So in order to decide the Arab nation, who is an Arab? First of all, you have to say, well, what is an Arab? Who is an Arab? Who were the first Arabs? And that's where Nicholson can help us. He goes into those things a bit. So we can look in classical sources and say, well, who and what are Arabs? When are they first mentioned? I think, I'm not totally sure because my mind's a little hazy, but in the Bible, I think you have the first mention in the Bible somewhere in the 8th century BC. You know, the Bible is a book of, I'm talking about the Hebrew Old Testament now, not the New Testament, obviously, which is written in the AD, CE, whatever, after Christ period. Whenever you think it was written, first, second, or third centuries after Christ, put in its final form at the conferences under the Roman Empire in the 300s. So we don't know when everything was written in the New Testament, as it were. But the Old Testament, basically, the Hebrew Bible is going to call that, hit its. We have a Hebrew Bible class, by the way, Wednesday evening, if you're interested. I teach that too. Basically hit its form in which we now have it. Most of the books were written in the 5th century BC, by the time of the 5th century BC. One or two books that are in the Christian Bible, but funnily enough are not in the Jewish Bible, the version of the Old Testament of the Christian Jews, were written in the 2nd century BC. And there's a lot of controversy about one of the most famous books of the Old Testament called the Book of Daniel. And the Book of Daniel, Jews to this day don't like to, I'm running all over the place to pick up the backgrounds of everyone. There's no straight line to develop knowledge. try to get everyone, lift up the cultural background of everyone, so therefore you all start to, you know, suppose you're a Muslim in the class, you've never heard this, or a Christian in the class, or Jewish, or Buddhist, or whatever, you may not have heard aspects of what I'm talking about. So we all get a basic information background to begin with, and then we start building on that. So whether you're a Muslim, or a Jew, or a Christian, or whatever, the book of Daniel should speak to you. I mean, it should mean something to you. And since it doesn't mean anything to most people anymore, rap does, and Steven Spielberg does, and you know, E.T. does, or something like that, or Madonna, or who's the one with that belly all the time that dances and sings, the blonde-haired girl who's pregnant?
Britney Spears.
Yeah, the Britney Spears. Everybody knows who she is, you know, but nobody knows Daniel. Part of our problem of our popular culture. Daniel is an incredibly important book. I don't think without Daniel you could have Islam, actually. You can't say that to a Muslim, because a Muslim, and of course I'm not a Muslim. I can say these things because I'm an academic. Believing Muslim, I'm not going to say this, because for him the Koran is a miracle. In academia, nothing's a miracle. We don't acknowledge miracles in academia. I think I told you that in first class. If I didn't and you weren't here, in academic, Western academic, we're in the West, like it or not. I mean, this is not Al-Azhar, this is not Tehran University, this is Cal State University, operating under the state legislature of California. That puts us in a Western civilization framework. Whether it's good or bad is not, I'm not here to discuss that. But in a Western framework, in a Western university framework, they don't consider miracles one way or the other. They leave miracles for churches, synagogues, mosques. There are, to them, as I said, when I was talking about Descartes the other day, what I didn't explain to you, aside from the calculus, is his method of systematic doubt. He started an intellectual system where he said, look, I got to start on some basis of something which is certain. Christians, Jews, Muslims might say, oh, well, what's certain is the Word of God. Well, that may be their certainty, and they can disagree over how much this person's Word of God agrees with that person's Word of God. And whether that agrees with an American Indian's Word of God, or if it agrees with a Buddhist Word of God, or a Hindu's Word of God, you follow me? So the Word of God can differ depending on who's spinning it. So that's a relative thing depending on your culture. And if you're the dominant culture, then you can enforce that upon everyone and say that is the Word of God, and everything you believe is heresy. And therefore in Christianity in the Middle Ages, up to contemporary, maybe 16th century, you could burn people. There were burning people in Mexico in places even, weren't even born Christian. Some of those poor Indian leaders in Peru and Aztec were burned, literally burned. They gave the king, you know, we'll give you the choice. You can be strangled or you can be burned. If you're just strangled, then maybe you'll be able to, if you take Christ beforehand, maybe you'll then be able to be resurrected. But if you don't take Christ beforehand and we just burn you, you're not going to be able to be resurrected and stuff like that. You know, this is what they did when they went to South America. So they were still burning people. So heretics are burnable, and in the Islamic world, there are people who feel that non-believers can be eliminated. And I know no Muslim is going to deny that there are people who think that. Maybe some Muslims don't think that, but there are some Muslims who do think that, and that's why in the TV you get pictures of people sawing people's heads off with knives, because in fact some people feel that they are permitted to do that to people who have transgressed in some manner. Not everyone thinks that. So, you know, when people are in a dominant position, they can enforce a belief structure. But what Descartes was saying is, I want to look for the first principle scientifically, not according to what this belief or that belief says it is. He said, I want to start with something, I want to doubt everything. I want to find something that I can't doubt, and that will be my first principle. So what did he come up with? Something he can't doubt, that he was sure of, that he was sure that was true. See, none of you know. We live in a Western universe, and the whole West is dying, sadly. Yes?
I think therefore I am.
Yeah, I think therefore. Were you going to say that too? Yeah. It's in Latin. It's the cogito ergo sum. And I don't know Latin that well, but it's something to do. I think, therefore I am. In other words, Descartes said, look, I can't deny the fact that I'm sitting here thinking at the moment. I know I'm thinking at the moment. And that implies that when you say I, that something exists. Not necessarily God, but me. Yeah. So we started with the thing, I mean, frankly, I didn't have to say I think, therefore, that's the most elegant way of putting it, because that's what Aristotle had God as in his metaphysics, if you know anything about Aristotle. He thought the first principle was thought, contemplating thought. How many are familiar with Aristotle's metaphysics? Yeah, you see, you know Madonna, and you know Britney Spears, and you know Bin Laden, but you don't know Aristotle. It shows the level of our culture. We have really collapsed. But unfortunately, there you are. So my God is the university, okay? So it's not a God, but I'll be in the temple of the Western Academic University, if you'll allow me. And so we'll study all things equally in that temple, for good or for bad. So part of that temple is people like Aristotle, and people like Aristotle developed the subjects. Do you know that? All the subjects we study today in the university are what Aristotle categorized. Aristotle liked to catalog things. He's the one who wrote the biology, the physics, the psychology, the aesthetics, and so on and so forth. These are the subjects that he laid down as the different subjects of human inquiry, and that's what the university is built on. And these have become departments. These are now departments. They all still use the same terms Aristotle used. So in case you've never heard that, that's why you can speak of Aristotle. He's not a great philosopher in the sense that he did everything from the armchair and never tested anything. He wasn't a good experimenter, but he knew how to catalog things. Like the reason he got into biology, he lived in some seaport place where he was exiled. He used to go down to the marketplace and look at all the funny creatures that came up out of the sea. Octopus and all the crabs and every other kind of fish and so on. And he began to see that there was purpose for all those characteristics that they had, and he started cataloging all those things as part of his biology, trying to get a theory about the universe. Okay, well, Descartes later on, said, I want a first principle, that everything that I can't doubt, and from there build it. So he said, I can't doubt that I'm thinking now. And you may think he can. Oh, you could say, I speak, therefore I exist. Professor Eisenman is speaking, therefore he exists. Well, maybe I don't exist, but in fact, that's about as certain as we can get. You can say, I go to the bathroom, therefore I exist, if you want to be crude. You can say, I sneeze, therefore I exist. You can say, I spit, therefore I exist. As long as you do what? Have the what in there? The pronoun, I. You said, once you get the pronoun in there and you have a first principle, something exists. The I who's doing it. Something that, so that it's just that Descartes put it in the most elegant way possible. You could say, I dream, therefore I exist. You could say anything, and you get a first principle. But his first principle is the most elegant, I think, that one could imagine. I think we like it anyway. It pleases us. I think, therefore I exist. And he went on from there. So that's what's, not that that means anything to us, but that's what our modern university is based on. So, when I spoke about Daniel now, I said that there are some people, I'm sure people in this classroom, I don't care about Daniel. Daniel came before Muhammad. Anything before Muhammad, I reject. Now, I'm sure there's people who speak like that. You know that there are people who speak like that. If you're a believer in Islam or not a believer in Islam, you know there are people who speak like that. I don't care about anything before the Prophet. How many have heard people speak like that? Well, heard about people who speak like that. Well, I've seen plenty of people who speak like that. It's not just in Islam, it's in Judaism too, it's in Christianity too. Jesus Christ saves, and so on and so forth, and that's it, I'm not able to think about Islam, Jesus is everything for me, and so on and so on. Well, the fact of the matter is that I don't think you could have Islam without Daniel. And I don't think you could have Christianity without Daniel either. Daniel is a key book. And in Daniel, most Muslims don't know that an angel is mentioned for the first time. By what name? Gabriel. That is a book written, according to believing Christians, 6th century BC. According to scholars, you see, we argue with each other even in these areas. 2nd century BC. And we can prove, I think, if you take a Dead Sea Scrolls class with me, I can easily prove it to you, can I, Mr. Paris, that Daniel's written in the 2nd century BC. There may be parts of it that go back to the 6th century BC, but some of the key parts are in the 2nd century BC. And Daniel is the first one in any biblical book to really name the angels. You know, in the other books, how many have read a Bible at all? Yeah, see, you may have heard it in church or something, but that's as far as it goes. One of the problems, again, about the Bible is that we're going to read the Koran. You're going to be more familiar with the Koran than the Bible, most of you. One of the problems with the Bible, I'm doing this as background so we all know where we stand in this situation that we're in. We're in a bad situation in the world at the moment in terms of intercultural relations. So it helps to sort some of these things out from all sides, so that people don't get the wrong idea or think that they have the only idea or the right idea. There is something to know, and we can teach what there is to know in a university, which we try to do. In this Daniel book, he actually names the angels for the first time. There are other books that didn't get into the Bible that also have some of the angel names that we get from the Dead Sea Scrolls, or what we call the apocryphal literature. Apocrypha means books that didn't get into the standard collections, extra. It's really a Greek word meaning additional books. It's nothing mysterious. It just means a Greek word meaning additional books that didn't get into the Orthodox collections. The angels are mentioned in those books to some extent too, but we wouldn't know the names of the angels. I bet you probably only know, if you're a Muslim, one angel. What's his name? Gabriel. Sometimes, by the way, the prophet speaks the Spirit, instead of Gabriel, meaning the Holy Spirit that Christianity speaks about. And Gabriel is identified with the Holy Spirit in some of the surahs of the Koran. So that's fine, but most Muslims wouldn't know. They would think, oh, Gabriel's something that's running around. Well, no, Gabriel was named in the book of Daniel in the 2nd century BC. Daniel is the first person that met Gabriel as an angel. He speaks about Gabriel. But there are other angels. For instance, how many have heard of Sariel? Ariel, not Ariel Sharon, but Ariel. All these angels had these names: Ariel, Sariel, Gabriel, Jibril, Michael, Michael. Michael had a specific function as the guardian angel of Israel, and he's actually mentioned in the Dead Sea Scroll documents in what's called the War of the Sons against the Sons of Darkness as a very important warrior angel in what we call the War Scroll. It was overlooking the final war against all evil on the earth. That's outlined in this War Scroll from what the Dead Sea Scrolls that I went to Italy to talk about. The Dead Sea Scrolls, in case you're not aware of them, were scrolls that were found along the Dead Sea, that's why we call them the Dead Sea Scrolls, in caves. At the time of the Arab-Israeli, Israel didn't exist then, the Jewish-Arab eruptions in 1947, the warring disagreements and other things that occurred. Right in the midst of that, the scrolls were found and brought up to Jerusalem in the middle of that period from 1947 to 48 when the first Arab-Israeli wars broke out at that time. So there's something miraculous about all that, I think, in terms of the timing. Why should the Dead Sea Scrolls have just come to light at that time? Documents from the 1st century AD or the 1st century BC. I mean, huge catch of documents found originally by Bedouin shepherds, although there's some disagreement about that. But in any case, right in the middle of the Arab-Israeli dislocations and upsets of 47, 48. So Michael is mentioned in the War Scroll. It's one of the scrolls that was found pretty much intact in the Qumran area in 1948, 49, 50, 51, and so on. And they're very interesting documents. And you can Google me up, and there'll be people saying a lot of bad things about me and good things about me relating to the scrolls, but you'll find me there, and you can Amazon me up, and you'll find the books I've written on that subject. So I've also written one book on Islam that doesn't get mentioned, the Islamic law book. So I've studied Islamic law at Columbia University for my PhD. So I have a book on Islamic law. But when I came out here to California as a young teacher, nobody was interested in Islamic law, so I had to teach what people were interested in order to make classes go. You couldn't do a class on Islamic law, you'd have one student. Cal State didn't go on the basis of one student. So you have to do, and people, when I first came here in the 70s, guess what people were interested in? Jesus. Everyone, if you mentioned Jesus, you were home free. So, it was, so if you got a course relating to Jesus, people would take it. So you have to get things that people could take in the religious studies department. We're just being born back then. Anyway, to go back to Daniel, he mentions Gabriel, but in Daniel, Gabriel is not the angel of revelation as he is in the Koran. Gabriel is the angel that explains to Daniel what his dreams mean, or what Daniel's visions mean. So in some sense he's the angel of revelation, but he's really the interpreter of the revelation. It's in chapter 7 and 8 of Daniel. He sees a figure, and the figure identifies himself as Gabriel, and he says, Gabriel, tell me the meaning of my vision. And then Gabriel explains to Daniel, the prophet, what the meaning of his vision is. So Daniel is really the interpreter of visions. And I'm sure if I went to a believing Muslim, they wouldn't know this. The first Daniel. So, that's what you say, but our prophet says this. So, well, yeah, but that's like putting the chicken before the egg. I mean, the first Gabriel was here, and the succeeding visions of or uses of the name Gabriel have to go back to the original usage of the term. If you're an academic, that would be the case. But anyway, don't argue about those things. I'm just giving you information. We'll see what Gabriel becomes in Islam. And Daniel has some other interesting things, like the end time, which is very important to Christianity. The Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven, which is very important to the Gospels. I saw one like a Son of Man riding on the clouds of heaven. That's proclaimed over and over again in the New Testament. The abomination of the desolation, standing where it ought not to stand. That's mentioned in Daniel to some extent. Daniel is the first real biblical book that is not really prophecy. It's another kind of literature which we now call apocalyptic. It's a Greek term that we use to cover things like what? Like the New Testament book of Revelation we call the Apocalypse. Four horsemen of the Apocalypse. It's a genre of visionary literature having to do with the end time and the last things. Which the Koran can be put in that category to some extent, because the prophet's always talking about the end time, the last days. And his angel is sometime Gabriel, sometime the Holy Spirit. But you can see a lot of this material from the 2nd century BC, 1st century BC in the Koran too, as you can in the New Testament. And from the Dead Sea Scrolls, like it or not, the scrolls are talking about the last times, the end time, and they're very interested in apocalyptic ideas. So those are things we know we can date from the 2nd century BC to the 1st century AD. I like to look at the Koran from that perspective and see how much has flowed into the Koran, because as an academic I like to see the connections of different cultures with other cultures. Now, believers don't like to think anything flowed into anything. For them, knowledge begins with and ends with their revelation and their prophet. And that's the way a believer will look at the Koran, and I respect that, but I don't think that's the way a university would want to look at it. Universities like to look at connections. In a mosque, church, again, synagogue, that's the way you might want to look at things, like in a Christian, depending on how Christian you were and how, in a Catholic religious perspective, the catechism book is going to decide everything. In a fundamentalist evangelical environment, it's always the Word. The Word is the thing that begins it all. And I don't think that people are too interested in what came before the Word. The Word being made flesh in the Gospel of John, and so being born again, etc. So these things depend on your perspective. But from an academic perspective, we like to see the influence of different earlier ideas on later ideas. And we don't think things occur in a vacuum. For instance, if an Eskimo was writing the material we find in the Koran, we might not think it related to things you find in the Dead Sea Scrolls or the Book of Daniel or Christianity. But the prophet over and over again is showing it knowledge about Christianity, knowledge about Bible stories, knowledge about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. He's a Middle Eastern being. He's operating in a Middle Eastern cultural sphere. He's operating from a Middle Eastern cultural perspective. He's operating within the context of literature that came before him. In the Middle East, he's telling stories about Joseph, which of course the Koran says come from an angel. That's the Koran perspective. We're not saying it doesn't. That's a matter of belief. But we know the stories about Joseph written in the 10th century BC in the Hebrew Bible. They don't disagree much with what the prophet's saying. We'll compare them actually in this class and see what the difference is. It's one of the good things, in fact, of going to university. If you've just read the Koran, you should go read the Bible too, and then you'll have something to compare this to that and make your own decisions. But if you're just operating in a vacuum, if I were building a jet plane or the space shuttle and I just look at one set of data, I may be guilty of ignoring other sets of data that could cause that space shuttle to crash. I want the scientists in those situations, the Airbus that I was on, I want that to be tested from all perspectives. I want the stress test on that metal to be absolutely perfect. I don't want any stone left unturned. I don't want that plane to come crashing down when I'm sitting 35,000 feet up in the air. I want all the systems to work. I want the radar to work. I want the positioning stuff to work. I want everything to work because, my life depends on it. So I'm not going to go by someone's faith where those things are concerned. And I don't think a person who is studying things takes all the data available to them. So a real student takes the Bible, the Koran, Mandaean literature, Persian literature, Egyptian literature. You can't do all that, of course. But Dead Sea Scrolls, whatever looks like it connects to this area and throws it into the pot and then draws its conclusions or her. So if I were talking about Eskimos suddenly coming up with the revelations of the Koran, okay, maybe I wouldn't want to do all that. Or someone in the Bushmen in Australia suddenly writing the Koran. Okay, then I might say, okay, there's no influence of Christianity, Judaism, Dead Sea Scrolls, previous stuff. That's just in a vacuum. That came direct from an angel to that Bushman there blowing on his, whatever, what's that trumpet they blow on called? What is it again? Yeah, blowing on his didgeridoo, that. Okay, fine, I saw them. I was in Australia this past summer, and they were sitting out there blowing on their didgeridoos. But I'm sure they don't know anything about the angel Gabriel in Australia, those native people. Unless the Christian missionaries got there and told them about it. So that's the point. If someone's showing this kind of knowledge, then you've got to look at where this knowledge came from. What the precursors of, whether you like it or not. And that's something of what we want to do too in this, as we go through this material, the early part. That's what makes the Koran so interesting to me from an academic standpoint. So, I don't know how we got off on that particular tangent, but I think we were talking about angels and different things like, how did we get on to the book of Daniel? I forget how we got, I know. Arabs. We're talking about Arabs and where Arabs were first mentioned. So I'm talking about the Old Testament, lest someone heap abuse on the Old Testament as an interesting book, which some people might do because they don't like things that are different from what they know. I showed you how important Daniel is to what you might know. That's why I picked up that subject to show the Old Testament has material about Gabriel. That in fact, if you didn't know that, you wouldn't know where Gabriel was first mentioned. The same with Arabs. So in some books of the Old Testament, I think the book of Job definitely mentions Arabs. And the book of Job we've identified as like a 4th century BC book. So there are Arabs in the 4th century, and I think there are some Egyptian inscriptions that mention Arabs around the 8th century BC as really, a separate identity called Arab. But nothing before that we can put our finger on that I'm aware of. You might find something. I'm not talking about the Koran or the Hadith or something. I'm talking about other sources. Certainly Roman texts are very interested in Arabs. So by the time of the 1st century BC and the 1st century AD and onwards, Arabs are important to Romans. Alexander, if you saw the movie recently, or if you know anything about Alexander, saw some of the documentaries, Alexander was going to lead an expedition before he was killed into the Arabian Peninsula because of the riches that were supposed to be there. What kind of riches was he looking for? Not oil riches. What was he looking for? Huh? Incense. Frankincense. Myrrh. Why did they like frankincense and myrrh? Why is the New Testament interested in, as Jesus is born, the camel caravans, or wherever they are, coming from Arabia with frankincense and myrrh, and they stop and adore the Christ child? Not that I believe any of that stuff, but that's the picture anyway that a believer is given, and if you do believe it, you're free to do so. That's the picture you get. But why in the Greco-Roman world, particularly the Roman world, were they interested in frankincense and myrrh?
Preserves.
Because the ancient world stunk. It stunk, just like New Orleans probably is doing at the present moment. All the guys who are down there saying, I'm not saying the Americans did a good job there. I'm not excusing anybody or complimenting anyone, but the ones who went into the Superdome, that was the first thing they said, wasn't it? That it smelled so bad that you could hardly go in there. The ancient world didn't have a proper sewage system. The ancient world didn't have this kind of thing. So where you've got conglomerations of people, big clusters of people, you've got smells. And where you got smells, you wanted to get somebody to overcome the smells. And the best place to get somebody to overcome the smells was, as it turned out, southern Arabia. Weird as it may seem, they had a special climate there. Something like California, we have special things here in California that they don't have anywhere else. What causes that? What tree do we have here that they don't have anywhere else in the world? Redwood, not palm trees everywhere. Redwood trees. Redwood trees. And I think some of those giant sequoias that are related to the redwood trees. Why do we have that? And they don't have it in like Cuba or Europe or Africa or Brazil or some other place. Because we're on 9,000 miles of ocean to the west of us that creates a lot of mist that comes in from the west. And these trees like redwood take the water from the mist in the sky, not from the roots in the ground. They have special leaves and stuff that they take it from, that fog, that early morning fog we get here in California. Well, as you go up the coast further in Oregon, it gets even more so. And they had developed a system where they could take it in and that's why they were so big. Because they have to reach up into the mist to get the water to sustain their growth. Now, I'm not a great biologist, and you guys who do botany and stuff can maybe gain something, but that's the reason we have this unique flora. My kid said, you know what I love about California? The name of it, California. Where did you get that crazy name? So it's the best state, he said to me, one of my children just yesterday, he said, you know why it's the best name? Because it's got the best name. And, well, sure, a lot of states have Indian names, but where did California come from as a name?
Spain.
Huh?
Spain.
Yeah, but what does it mean? You see, what does it mean? Why is it so? Well, Kali, it's actually in Greek. Kali in Greek is good, kalo. And fornia means living things. Good flora and fauna, basically. Good vegetation, life, and so on. It impressed the Spanish explorers. It didn't come from Spain. And one of the explorers who was traveling past the coastline saw it and said, California. Beautiful vegetation, life area place. And so we got this beautiful name for this region, California. And it's because of that. Okay, Southern Arabia had a similar thing. The monsoon. Now I can get on with where I'm at here. I'll get rid of Iraq. Get to our main subject here, which I think Mr. Harris was talking to you about last time. The Arabian Peninsula. There she blows. Red Sea. I'm not a great map drawer, but you recognize it to some extent. Up here is I don't know what you call it, the Persian or Arabian Gulf, depending on which nationalist you are and so on. But here, you see, the monsoon comes up the coast of east coast of Africa here, goes over to here and goes all the way to India here, and then falls down on India and rains. How many have been to India? I've been there when I was, probably before you guys were born. I was in India in 1962. Anyone born before 1962? I was a hippie, hitchhiked to India, through all the Afghanistan, all these other places. I was on the road, as it were. This is how people on the road end up. You're looking at people like me. That's how we end up like this. After we travel and get around a lot. But, you know, I was like you guys. I was a hippie or something like that, you know, hipster or whatever. I was on the road. Traveled by myself with all these places. Went to Lebanon and Turkey and Afghanistan. I was in Afghanistan. I was in Pakistan. I was all these places. But in India, if you have the monsoon, man, you'll never forget it. It begins around June and it ends around September or so. It comes in like, you know, it's just suddenly you're walking along and it's like rain falls on you, like, you know, you've seen it, huh? Like heavy rain, and then suddenly it stops. And you're all wet and it's all humid and you're walking along, and an hour later, you know, this rain. It's so humid and moist that the rain comes in, and it's really, it's not frightening, it's kind of beautiful, because the rain cools it off for a bit, you know. It's better to have the rain than not the rain. But, you know, it's really something, an unforgettable thing. But that comes all the way from East Africa. And what happened was that here in the southern part of Arabia, this is sort of mountainous here, the monsoon would hit these mountains here, the monsoon laden with moisture breezes, where they came from. I'm not a great weather specialist to know. And they would dump the rain here before they got to India. So this southern part of Arabia had a different climate than the rest of Arabia. And that's why the Romans referred to this Arabia, it's all in Nicholson, that's why I wanted you to have Nicholson, as Arabia Felix. It's Latin. So we know they used Arabia back then. What does that mean? Arabia Felix. Well, Felix is not just a name like Felix the cat. What does Arabia Felix mean? Where, you know, when you send someone a greeting card, what do you say? Felicitations. It's the Latin word for be happy. Happy Arabia. It's the word for happiness. Felicitations. Be happy. We use it in English, sending from Latin in words like that. Felicity. Comes from the word felix. Latin word felix. So they call the southern, but that's what Alexander was after. Because in happy Arabia, you had this rainfall that produced this odd tree-like thing that the gathering of whose gum, really aromatic resin from the bark, you know, like you get maple syrup from the trees in New England. You tap the trees, you put a little pail under them, and the maple syrup comes out. Or you get in South America the same thing, rubber trees or whatever they get rubber from. They tap the tree and this little syrupy stuff comes out and they make tires out of it. Well, in Southern Arabia, the stuff that came out turned out to smell very good. And that's where you get frankincense and myrrh from the resin of trees grown in Southern Arabia from this peculiar climate. Which is what made it Felix and happy. And why people prized it and wanted it, because the whole world stunk at that time. And the sooner you could get things to stop the stink and the smell, the happier you were. They made perfume out of it and every other thing. Christians still go around churches, they have these things that they shake, don't they? These priests shake. What are they shaking out? Incense in the church to make it smell better. Hippies used to have these little sticks that they used to burn. I don't know if you still, what were they called, those little things, sticks that you burn with that? Incense. Incense, yeah. It's all originally from Arabia, Southern Arabia. That's other places that got versions of it, but nothing was as good. It's very precious still. You can go to Southern Arabia and you can pay a lot of money for this stuff. Still extremely precious stuff. Before oil, that's what they were looking for. And that's what the caravan trade was all about, bringing this stuff north. So actually, Arabs are first mentioned somewhere really as caravanners. And the word Arab at that time meant something like what we now say Bedouin today. Since an Arab will say, oh, he's a Bedou. He's Bedou, he's a nomad. But at that time, that's what Arab meant. Bedouin. So today, even in English, we have the word Bedouin. And it still exists in Arabic. But Bedouin are not really highly respected in the Arab world. I mean, I've lived in parts of the Arab world, and the city people, city Arabs, townsmen and Arabs, ooh, dirty smells, camel smells, flea bitten, oh, go away, I don't want you. They come to the house, sell rugs or something, and people either buy or chase them away, but not something that's highly regarded. And neither do the Bedouin like the city Arabs that much either. So it isn't that everyone loves each other, it's a big love fest. It's people are people, and that's what people have their feelings about each other. And the Bedouins are looked up and down or by city people or townspeople as like dirty. They don't have showers and things, and they probably smell and stuff like that. And they live in tents and whatever, and they move with the flocks, etc. But that's what the pre-Islamic culture in Arabia had a lot like that, not totally like that. And that's what we're going to look at in this Nicholson book, the stories and legends of the pre-Islamic Arabs and these cultures and how that worked. We'll do that next time. But let's finish what we're doing now about this word Arab. So the first references are 800. Then there's references in the book of Job around 600 to 400. And then in the Roman period. Well, in the Roman period, I erased my Iraq map here. But the word Arab went all the way up from Arabian Peninsula into what we would now call Transjordan, on into Iraq, all the way up to Mesopotamia into northern Syria. For the Romans, all that was what they referred to as Arabia. And we get it from the Roman historians. They refer to all that area as Arabia. Not just what we call now the Arabian Peninsula. But they record all through Iraq and these places the Romans called Arabia. And you get it in the Roman historians. If you read any of the Roman historians of the 1st, 2nd century, you'll see that that's what they are referring to. Tacitus, for instance. If you've ever heard of him, if you want to look it up, he's the principal one, but there are other ones too. Geographers like Pliny. So, there are a lot of other Roman writers. The Roman literature is quite extensive. So this is what they refer to. So by the 1st century BC AD, Josephus will be talking, the Jewish historian of the 1st century, wars in Palestine, the so-called Jewish war. We'll talk about that as well, the Arabs and things like that. Herod, the king of the Jews, supposedly. Everyone's crazy enough to think Herod was a Jewish king. How many think Herod is a Jewish king? Most people. Oh, Herod, the king of the Jews. No, that was a Roman title that the Romans applied to whoever was in control of the country. Herod was not a Jew at all. He was born a Idumean, Greco-Romanized Arab. He was from, his mother was from Petra, the city in Transjordan, which was the capital of the Arab kingdom of Transjordan, and his father came from a family of priests on the what is now near Gaza, or the Jews call Ashkelon, and he was a Greek priest of I forget what the Apollo, I think. And when the Romans came in, he was one of the people that helped them come in and conquer the area in the 1st century BC in the Roman armies, and he was because he had connections on both sides of the Jordan River, and he rose through Roman ranks to become the first foreign governor in Palestine after the Romans conquered the place. And then he parlayed his governorship into a family kingship that then became called King of the Jews. But Herod was never a Jewish king as such, and that's what all the trouble was in the 1st century BC, that the Romans imposed this outside monarchy in place of the local native monarchy. And that's what the Dead Sea Scrolls are all about too. I can tell you that from the work that I've done. You can look at my work and you'll see, but you've taken those classes. You know what is involved there. Mr. Ferris, you know what's involved in all that. But most people don't even know that. Christians don't know that. Well, most people from Islamic people have never even heard of Herod, for that matter. Christians know Herod because of the birth of Christ, and Herod wants to kill all the Jewish children in the Gospel of Matthew in order to get rid of Christ, supposedly. Anyway, these are stories we deal with in Historical Jesus class. We'll teach a Historical Jesus class next fall. If you want to take it, you can. And where I'll deal with a lot of these issues in more detail. And I'm only teaching every fall, so this fall I've got an Old Testament class Wednesday evening. If you want to do that, you're welcome to come to that. And next fall, I'm going to do Historical Jesus and some other class. Probably won't be doing the Dead Sea Scrolls again, because I'm finished after next year here at this university. They put me out to pasture. I'm in what's called FERP, but they make you an offer you can't refuse. They give you a lot of money if you'll say you'll leave at a certain point, so that younger faculty members that they pay a third of what they may pay someone else can be brought in. So it pays the university to offer older faculty members a big bribe to get them out of here. And most older faculty members are taking it because they know they don't have a lot of years left anyway, so they take the bribe and they leave. But the university's happy because then they get rid of high-priced staff and replace it with lower-priced staff. Anyway, that's another story. That's why you see a lot of your older professors are on what's called FERP. They teach 1 term on, 1 term off for 5 years, and they promise to leave. And the university has that in black and white. They can't change their mind, so they're gone. I got, as I said, 1 year left after this. So if you want to take anything more from me, that's you're welcome to. I'm happy to. I haven't taught Islam in 3 years, but I want to teach it once before I retire. That's why I'm in this class now. And the other young lady, Miss Starkwald, she's a very good teacher too, and she's teaching her course at a different time. But I used to teach Islam here, all the Islam course for 25 years, and then she came in and I let her teach a while to get her feet, get her bearings here. But I want to do it once more. This is the once more time I'm taking it. Now, so the Roman sources mention Arabs. Herod was an Arab, and so on, or Arab background. And at that time, they were traders, mostly nomadic traders, caravanners, and things like that. What we would call a Bedouin or a Bedou today. But today, what are Arabs? Most Arabs are living in towns and cities. Palestine, for instance. Are they Bedouins? No, of course not. That's mostly big towns, huge towns, maybe not very prosperous ones like Gaza. The West Bank, we're all familiar with. Iraq, big cities. People getting into difficult situations because of the cluster of populations, processions being spooked to jump into rivers during religious festivals. But these are mostly, almost all those people from Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Egypt, Palestine, Jordan. Those are Arab countries to some extent, largely Arab countries. They're mostly city, town, village dwellers. They are not nomads, right? You're familiar with that? Well, so when did that transformation occur? Well, probably sometime in this Roman period that it started, that these areas became seen as Arab, but they're not Bedouin Arab. The Prophet was Bedouin to some extent Arab, but we see he comes from a very important family in a settled area that had control of shrines. So even he's not really a Bedouin, but he was part of the caravan trade. I mean, he didn't wander after flocks and things like a pure Bedouin will do, as we will see. But he was in the caravan trade, which is the north-south trade of the spice, and then bringing things down from the Greco-Roman world that was valued in the southern part of the Arabian Peninsula in return for this. And I'll talk more about that next time. I'll keep you for 5 more minutes, then we'll go. I want to try to find a good place to stop here. So Arab, or on the whole, are townsmen. Particularly in the modern period, they are townsmen. Now, if you took a DNA sample of people claiming to be Arabs, suppose you took a DNA sample of people. Afghans don't really claim to be Arabs, so they're out of it. Pakistanis don't claim to be Arabs. Persians don't claim to be Arabs. Well, in the West, we used to think of all these people as Arabs, but they're not. Kurds are not Arabs. But if you took a DNA sample of all these different peoples, and I'm sure they're going to be doing this more and more, I don't think you'll find that the lineage is that homogeneous. I think Egyptians you'll find to be Egyptians. I think North Africans you'll find to be pretty Berber and other sort of groups coming into there. I think you'll have a lot of Greco, indigenous populations in Syria and other places, which will be quite different. And a lot of people came into the Arab sphere of influence through warfare, certainly in the expansion of Islam, became Arabized, if you like. Some people's parents may have been actually captives, may have been killed by Arabs, may have been enemies of Arabs, Persians and others, who now claim to be Arabs. People in North Africa, for instance, may have all been conquered people and so on. Egyptia was conquered, etc., 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 etc. So, DNA would clarify a lot of that, but what happens? I had a professor at college who gave me the answer to all these things. He was in literature. He was a really smart guy. And turned out to be a fundamentalist Christian. Got himself in a lot of trouble later and so thrown out of a lot of colleges. But the students, there's always a professor students all worship and want to take his classes. He was one of those people. And I remember the one thing that sticks in my mind, what he said, poetry is truer than history. Poetry is truer than history. I'm passing it on to you. What he meant by that is, it isn't what really happens that matters. Your parents might have been anti-Arab. You may have been ultimately conquered, forgot your roots, and turned into a pro-Arab. Or someone who claimed Arab roots, or whatever. You'd have the DNA would have to finally tell. But ultimately, the poetry dominates. It's what people think happened is what really matters, not what really did happen. So the poetry is, and you've heard it 100 times, we're all descendants of Abraham. Something that comes, by the way, out of the Old Testament. We'll talk about that next time. We're all descendants of Abraham. The Jews and the Arabs, they're cousins. The Jews are descendants of Isaac and Jacob. The Arabs are descendants of Ishmael and Esau, and so on and so forth. Well, I bet you, again, if you did the DNA, that you wouldn't find that was 100% correct, or not even maybe 50% or even 35% correct. The problem is what people, I think, wouldn't happen with the Egyptians and others, because they were always considered in the Bible the children of Ham, and so on, a totally different people group. Not that I care about racism at all. This doesn't make a difference. Just saying that the picture people, though, have is, this is what we are, and that comes out of the Koran. That comes out of the Koran. And once you are into the Koran, then, in fact, you take the belief structure of the Koran upon yourself. And so then you become the son of Ishmael, and so on. And the Arabs are the sons of Ishmael, according to part of the Hebrew genealogical stuff in the Old Testament, which the prophet and the Koran are very familiar with. Now, this also may come from the angel, depending if you believe in angels. Again, you have to decide all that for yourself. After you weigh all the evidence, not me. I can't weigh it for you. Only you can. I can only say that it's what people think happened, not what really did happen. I think the same thing for the Gospels, as you know. It's what people think Jesus is, not what actually may have occurred at that time, that matters today. It's the picture of Jesus as the Son of God and the supernatural being who can touch people and their blood stops flowing if they've got a problem with their menstrual cycle, or who have a leprosy and he can cure their leprosy, or he can raise people from the dead, or he can take evil spirits and throw it into swine, and all that kind of picture. That's the Jesus everyone thinks existed, when to my mind that's just the poetry. That's not what really happened. That's what the poet said happened. The final statement of all these things to me belongs to Plato. You know what Plato said about poets? That are worse sort of people. We admire poets. But the poets, why did Plato think the poets were the worst sort of people? He wanted them banned from what? The ideal state that he was constructing. What was the ideal state Plato was constructing? You say, what's this got to do with Islam? I think you'll see that all these things relate. It was called the Republic. How many have read the Republic? Again, few of you take philosophy classes. No, I bet you didn't read the whole thing. But you read some excerpts. But anyway, I didn't even read the whole thing. It's too boring. But in any case, it's good to read the whole thing. But one of the things he says in that is, the poet should be banned from the Republic because they create the myths by which the simple-minded people live. And the simple-minded people believe these legends and stories as fact. And therefore they deceive the people and they create an artificial universe which is one of total darkness and blindness. What's the parable Plato gave for this universe of which the average person lives in? It's called the cave parable. How many remember? You remember the cave parable? You remember he says the average person is like sitting inside a cave, in a dark cave, chained by fetters, and there's light outside like the sun, sitting out here, and he sees shadows against the wall, the back wall of the caves of what's going on out there in the light. But he's chained inside this world of total darkness, and that's how the average person lives. To me, it's like a big cinema house. And the average person is like I was on that airplane, stuck in this cinema or this airplane his whole life, and all you're doing is seeing the vague images of the reality outside. And Plato said, what? The philosopher is the person who throws off the chains, goes outside and stands in the light of the sun and sees things for how they are. Wow, now you don't necessarily have to believe that. I'm saying that's why he didn't like the poets, because he said the poets created the myths by which the simple people lived. And I think that is true. Not bad. I don't condemn them like Plato. I think they're beautiful colored myths and full of lovely, story and excitement and passion and uplift. But on the other hand, the poetry becomes the reality, and the real thing disappears. Achilles, you just saw the story with Brad Pitt, supposedly, it was a terrible movie. He's this superhero whose mother dipped him into the sea, so he's only got an Achilles heel that was missed from the immortality, and so when he's finally killed, he's hit in the heel, this kind of rubbish. But it's beautiful storytelling. But this is what the people believe. And so a lot of that has to do with some of the information we're talking about. So finally, Arabs. Everyone thinks they're Arab, who comes from the Middle East. What finally defines an Arab? I think what finally defines an Arab is the language you speak. That's my definition. If you speak Arabic, you're an Arab. It's the spread of how far the language got that defines if you're an Arab or not. For instance, if you're in the Sudan and you don't speak Arabic, like the Northerners do, and you're a Southern Sudanese, then you're different. You're not an Arab. But the Northern Sudanese, maybe exactly the same people, think they're Arabs, and they persecute the Southerners, enslave them, terrorize them, and stuff like that. It's the language. For instance, I'll keep you very short. One moment more. If you're a Druze, which is a sect in the Syrian mountains in northern Palestine and other places, you're a different sort of religion, but you speak Arabic, you're an Arab. The Arabs speak about Jewish Arabs. They say, oh, the Jews from Arab countries, they can stay in Palestine. They're Arabs. Why? Because they speak Arabic. The Christians in Arab countries, they're Arabs. They're Arab Christians. Why? Because they speak Arabic. So, to my mind, what defines what you are is the language you speak, not the blood. Nothing more than the language. The blood may play a part, it may not. I leave you with that thought. Next time you can attack me on that if you want. Good luck. Thanks for listening. We'll get into real stuff. Hopefully, see if we can get that book. I'm really angry and upset about that book.
Did you pass around a sign-in sheet today?
No.